I'm going to ask Dr. Curry to come and speak next. David Curry is a commissioner of USCIRF, the United States Commission on the International Religious Freedom, which is an independent, bipartisan U.S. federal government agency created by the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act. USCIRF monitors the universal right to freedom of religion or belief, makes policy recommendations to the President, the Secretary of State, and Congress, and tracks the implementation of these recommendations. David Curry is also the President and CEO of Global Christian Relief, which provides aid and advocacy for those suffering from religious persecution, particularly those affected by violence for practicing their Christian faith. He has traveled to several countries and has traveled extensively through Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And we are very glad and welcome David Curry to the podium now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today. It's a great honor. I'm touched by your stories, the heartbreak of your families, and honored to be here. As it was mentioned, my name is David Curry. I'm a commissioner at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF. When you find people from all different faiths, two different sides of the aisle here in Washington who agree on one thing, that's unique. And that's what you have at USCIRF. You have a group of people from all different faiths, all different backgrounds, Democrat, Republican, of all different stripes, and yet we agree that what's happening in India, and particularly as we discussed today in Manipur, is egregious. Since 2020, USCIRF has recommended that the State Department designate India as a country of particular concern. That is because of systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of human rights and religious freedom. We made this recommendation yet again just days ago in our 2024 annual report, which highlights a number of concerns and violations of religious freedom. It's at the local, state, and national level in India, and it includes targeting Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Dalits, indigenous, and scheduled tribal people. One of the most alarming and egregious instances of these violations is the conflict in Manipur. It was just a year ago that my colleagues and I watched in horror and then quickly expressed alarm about the serious and egregious violations we saw coming out of Manipur. I personally received daily videos, some of which were too graphic even for any sort of publishing, that showed what was happening there. What originally had begun or seemed as though it was a protest in May quickly turned into widespread violence by predominantly Hindu Meitei and Christian Kuki tribes, and had left hundreds of people dead and tens of thousands of people displaced. During the initial weeks, USCIRF received multiple reports from individuals whose homes had been destroyed, students fleeing violence, pastors whose churches had been burned to the ground. And as the conflict continued and escalated, we know of the shocking story of the two Christian women who were being subjected to sexual violence. Up until that point, there was inaction and silence from Prime Minister Modi and the Indian government on the crisis. To date, various waves of violence have targeted religious symbols, Bibles, places of worship and refuge, including churches and synagogues. In total, as was mentioned, nearly 375 churches of different denominations, 132 temples, 2 synagogues have been burned or damaged across the state. And in September, an Indian Supreme Court committee directed the state government to safeguard, imagine that, months later, safeguard all religious places of worship from damage and destruction. When Christian Kukis have been disproportionately targeted in these attacks, Christian Meiteis have also been attacked. And several pastors have alleged that they were forced to convert to other faiths and renounce their faith. Members of the minority Jewish community were also subjected to violence and denied access to conduct religious burial ceremonies. Unfortunately, these instances in Manipur mark a broader, more widespread pattern of deteriorating religious freedom conditions throughout India. USCIRF reporting shows that for the last several years, the Indian government at the national, state, and local levels have promoted and enforced laws and policies that undermine religious freedom of its own citizens. This has been systematic, as I mentioned, and ongoing. It's a pattern. In particular, state governments have implemented a number of legal restrictions on conversion, religious dress, marriage, cow slaughter. The national government also continued to suppress critical voices, particularly religious minorities and those advocating on their behalf, through surveillance, harassment, demolition of property, and detention under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. In 2023, for example, NGOs reported 687 incidents of violence against Christians alone, who continue to be detained under various anti-conversion laws. Over the last year, religious leaders across various faiths have been central, coming together yet again, people of various faiths, to call for peace and reconciliation across Manipur through prayer meetings and collaborative exchange of ideas on how to protect religious minorities in the future. At USCIRF, we will continue to raise Manipur and other religious freedom issues with the State Department and make recommendations to take these abuses seriously, particularly the importance of designating India as a country of particular concern. Thank you very much for your time.